The most difficult for me to understand how human can come and do those things. I can't understand it.
How about sexual violence against women, men, children?
Violence is always about power. It is always about establishing the power. It is to show I am stronger than you. I can conquer you. I can destroy you. I want to walk in Moscow wearing Ukrainian military uniform, especially on Chamberlain Lane.
Hello, I'm Jenny Klochko and you're watching my podcast. It's the platform for news, stories and guests beyond your daily newsfeed. Today is a bit different. You got used to see servicemen, soldiers, experts on war, but we're going to discuss another aspect of war, the aspect when the Russian army specifically targets civilians. And my guest today, she's dealing with outcomes, with the results of those targets. She has lots of stories for us to tell, what she sees when she comes on the liberated, the occupied territories in Ukraine. My guest, Natalia Leliukh, she's a gynecologist, a volunteer, she's blogger and author. And she found time in her busy schedule to talk to us today. Natalia, hello, how are you today?
Thank you for my presentation.
I am switching into Ukrainian. I understood everything, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I hope it will be interesting for everyone.
After the full-scale invasion, 24th in 2022, you've taken emotionally a heavy burden and very demanding mission. You travel around to the liberated, the occupied territories, offering medical assistance to anyone who needs it. And how has it started and why you decided to do it? What town or village was the first for you and how was that experience?
Можна не перекладати питання. Я
You
як
don't need
собака
to
все
translate.
розумію, але сама
I
дуже
understood the
мало
question.
замовна практика, тому
I am like a dog. I understand everything, but I lack practice. My listening and reading are good. We started our work on the 29th of March in 2022. The first trip was without me. I was working with Ukrainian National Police.
Який поїхав в Бучу.
Their team went to Bucha. They entered the town when nobody could after Russians left. So I missed the first trip. The next day, they told me to be ready to go with them, as there were many people who asked for doctors' help and medicines. The police crew could not help them. Medically, they did not have necessary qualification. I went with them the next day. I packed everything I thought I needed for that trip. The representatives of the Red Cross were already there when we arrived. We realized they did not need us. So we went off to the little villages nearby Hostomel. These villages where 300 or 500 people live on average. So it is very small settlements. And those people did not have access to the humanitarian aid. It was the third day after the liberation. We realized it was where we needed the most. We had the first aid kits, and we could assist them in everything they needed right there. Also, I am a qualified surgeon. So, on the first days, there were cases of the shrapnel's injuries, and people did not contact doctors. There were lots of other traumas. Unfortunately, there were a few people whom we could not save lives, but they were hospitalized, being on the deathbed.
Скажімо так, ми госпіталізували для вмирання людей, які вдома під час окупації.
Those were the cases with stroke, heart attack, and hypoglycemic coma, as they did not have access to the diabetes medicine during the Russian occupation. Those people's health has worsened. We called the ambulance. The police did. They were hospitalized. But we knew there was nothing can be done to save them.
You were saying in your previous interviews, because you're a speaker on behalf of these people who went through occupation, and you were saying that people in Bucha and people in Kherson, they are different. And why is that? And do you have to psychologically approach them differently when you come to see them?
Різниця є досі. Різниця в основному пов'язана не
There
стільки
is
з
a
регіоном,
difference.
да, мається на
It
увазі
is
там це
not because it's
Херсонщина
a
чи
different
Київщина чи
region,
Вінниччина. Різниця є
like
в тому,
Kyiv,
як
Kherson, or
швидко
Chernihiv.
відбулася окупація
This difference
і як
depended on how
згуртована
quickly it
була.
was occupied
Тому що
and how
якщо
long it
це
was.
якщо це
If it's a
коротка
quick
історія
story, like
окупації,
it
яка
was in
була
Kyiv
раніше,
and
там
Chernihiv
6
regions,
місяців до
up to a
місяця,
month, it was a
то
sharp
коли ми туди
pain when we
приїздили, це
arrived
був
there.
гострий біль.
Sharp
Це
pain
гострий
and
біль, це
desperation.
був розпач,
They did not
люди,
have
звичайно, не
time to
встигли
adapt.
адаптуватися
We saw
до
raw
обставин. Вона
post-traumatic
всі бачила
reactions,
гострі
and we
життя,
could see it
або
clearly.
прям гостро
If it
посттравматична
was the
реакція,
case
яка
of the long
була явно
occupation,
проявлена.
like in
І
Kherson,
якщо це була
Mykolaiv,
історія
or Donetsk
окупації, це
regions,
Херсонщина,
especially Donetsk as it is
Донеччина, або інші
occupied for the
області,
past 10 years, people managed to adapt to the situation,
то люди, звичайно, адаптуються. Люди адаптуються,
and they
люди
get used to
звикають
it.
жити в
They
цьому,
found the
люди
way
знаходять
how to
спосіб,
survive
як
in it.
виживати в цих умовах.
So, they have
І,
different
звичайно,
stories.
там зовсім інші
If
історії.
Russians
Плюс,
occupied the
звичайно, нам
territory for a long
досить
time,
довго під
they built a
окупацією,
logistic
росіяни
chain.
встигають
Every
зробити
village or town they
логістичну
divided into
мережу,
sectors,
мається на увазі, що коли вони
appointed the
поступово йдуть до
representative
населеного
from
пункту,
the
вони там
street.
роблять, ділять його
There's a
на
representative
такі
from the
квартали,
block above them,
визначають
and those
вуличку,
responsible at the
відповідальну
commandant's
вулицю,
office.
потім над ними
This
є
system
квартал,
allowed
над
them
кварталом
to
вже
supply
є
medicine
комендатура.
or
І,
satisfy
в
other
принципі,
needs of the
організовуються
civilians.
певні функції і на
So the
регіонів,
Russians,
і
through the
якась
chain
там
of the
медична
responsible
допомога. Вони
representatives,
організуються.
can help
Рахунок в цих
civilians.
вуличних
They
кварталах,
can't
і
do
вони
it if
точно
the
знають, хто в
occupation
них на
lasted
вулиці,
about a
кому треба
month.
допомога.
It requires
Це
longer
може
time.
бути, але за місяць,
So,
звичайно, це
people
не
who went
встигає
through the long
зробитися. Це треба, щоб
occupation,
була довга
they do not
окупація.
have issues with
Тому люди,
chronic
які
conditions,
прожили
but have
довгу окупацію,
psychological
вони
problems.
не стільки мають
For
проблеми там
instance,
з
losses
фізичними
and
здоров'ям,
humiliation,
тільки,
and of
звичайно, вони
course,
мають
its abuses in its all
психологічні проблеми,
aspects.
проблеми втрат,
Usually, these people lose the
проблеми
nearest and
приїздів.
dearest.
Ну і,
It is
звичайно,
either
це
natural
насилля
death during
психологічне,
occupation, or
фізичне
they were
і
killed by
вигляді
Russians or
насилля.
taken into
Плюс,
captivity.
звичайно, вони зазвичай ще й втрачають близьких. Це або люди помирають під час окупації,
So,
або
they didn't have
їх
chance to
вбивають,
connect,
особливо
and
чоловіків,
their
або
location is
забирають в полон.
unknown.
Тобто з ними немає зв'язку, і рідні не знають, де вони.
When Russians targeting civilians, I mean physical violence, sexual violence, and basically not just controlling the life on the occupied territories, but making this life unbearable. It's another tool of war, isn't it?
Ну, вони там є, мені здається, декілька
I
різних
think they have
підходів,
a
вони
few
є.
different
Особливо, якщо ми
approaches.
говоримо про молодь і про
Russians
у мене,
treat young
наприклад,
people
ну,
differently.
дитини, да,
For
в
example,
неї
the nanny of my baby
знаходяться
son
рідні
has
на
family on the
окупованих
occupied
територіях.
territory.
І вона з ними має зв'язок, звичайно, по інтернету.
She keeps in touch with them.
І
They say
справа в тому,
Russians
що
have
вони
a
вважають,
very
що в
distinctive
молоді у них
attitude
певне
towards
інше
Ukrainians' youngsters.
молодь, вони намагаються, особливо якщо це розумні росіяни, називаємо це так, вони намагаються перетягнути на свій
They
бік,
try to
і
convince
це
them to support Russia,
пропаганда, це
and it
заборона
is done by
розмовляти
the means of
мова, це
propaganda,
заборона
and its
читати
ban
українську
on
літературу, це
speaking
заборона
Ukrainian
дивитися
or reading
будь-які
Ukrainian
програми
books.
українською, інтернет українською, і за
They
це вони,
can't
звичайно,
watch any
класно
Ukrainian
реагують.
content. If they
Але
caught doing it,
щодо
they would be
молоді, у
arrested
них
and taken to
купа
the basement to
можливостей
be
потрапити
beaten
в
and
інтернет.
tortured.
Якраз була зараз
Russians
така
encourage
кампанія,
children and teenagers to study in
можна зробити
universities in
через
Russian
будь-який
Federation.
цивілізований вуз,
No
і
tuition fee
вони
for
дуже
Ukrainian
закликають, і
youth.
це безкоштовно,
Also,
тому що там
they give the
доплачують стипендії,
scholarships for
тобто вони
students to
намагаються
support themselves.
одразу, тобто
So,
ця історія
Russians are planned it all and prepared to
вони
offer these
намагаються на
things.
себе
Their aim to
забрати
gather
свої
young people under their
впливи,
cultural and
свій
psychological
психологічний
influence
вплив,
and
плюс
keep them under
допомагати
own propaganda
тих, хто на
narratives,
це ще
those who are
легко
responsive to it.
люди дорослі,
Russians can't convince adults in their good intentions while disrupting the peaceful life. But to deal with kids is easier. Young people and kids is their target audience, and they do it quick and easy. They are trying to do it. If the child's family was speaking Russians, it's even easier because the person would listen and accept Russian propaganda, Russian TV series.
How about sexual violence against women, men, children? And it's another tool, and it's not about sex, is it?
Yeah, I understood it. And it's not about sex. I talk often about it. This question is often asked. The violence, it is not only about satisfaction. It can be about pleasure also, but it's more about the sadistic type of people. Violence is always about power. It is always about establishing the power. It is to show I am stronger than you. I can conquer you. I can destroy you. I am in charge. Of course, violence during the war is impressive, various. It depends on adrenaline, alcohol, and also depends on the basic needs of this person who is violating. Most of the situation I dealt with, and those patients who survived, and they needed my help. They all said the phrase, Russians wanted to smear us. So it was not about the sex. Their aim was humiliation to its full extent. They wanted to achieve it. Russians wanted to manifest their superiority and strength. They affirmed their positions through humiliation other people.
And you were saying there are two waves of sexual violence at the beginning of the occupation and before the liberation. Could you tell more about it?
I talk often about it. I might not be an expert. I mean, I do not do any research or statistics about it. I am not the only doctor who does it. My personal opinion is based on things I've seen and heard myself since the full-scale invasion. The first wave is easier for women because Russians act like winners. They are the conquerors. They demonstrate how strong and powerful they are. But men, women, and children survive after this kind of violence. These victims need for demonstration of their power, so they need them alive. Dead victims would not appreciate their power. The second wave of violence happens when Russians realize they are retreating and they have lost at least on this area, and it is dangerous for the victims. There comes the desire to take the lives of the victims. No need to leave alive. It looks like Russians, revenge for the refusing being under their rule. Such kind of violence and rapes, or they just could beat up the babushkas, or tragic situations with children in the basements with alcohol. I had a situation in Lyman. We came there, and the services could not understand what has happened there. There was a woman who clearly was under long influence of the alcohol. She was around 50 years old. She had psychotic seizures. She was in the front garden of her house and was screaming that there was her colleague in the basement and he was cemented in the wall. She wanted us to get him out of there. It turned out she was beaten up a lot during occupation. No rape, but severely beaten. Lots of alcohol, not much food. All those factors provoked her psychotic reaction. Also, I found her dead dog nearby. She could not remember when and who did it. We had to call medical transport to hospitalize her to the psychiatric ward because it was absolutely terrible. We could not do anything for her. It is also a violence. Their actions pushed her to that state of her mental health and psychotic reactions and conditions. Especially, it is for the vulnerable people with chronic conditions. That's why it is possible.
But what happens with people who has some chronic conditions like diabetes, or those who go in through chemotherapy, for example, people with cancer, or mothers who supposed to give a birth soon, but they are in the occupation? What happening to these people? Have you met them? What kind of experiences they had?
I would like to start with a story. It was summer in 2022. We had lots of trips to Kharkiv region. There were towns and villages near the front line. Oh, no, I am wrong. It was September that year. I remember it was warm. They did not have electricity for 4 months. The village was in 5 kilometers from the front line. They lived without electricity. We were asked to check the house on the outskirts. There was an elderly couple in their 70s and 80s. They both had a bunch of chronic conditions, and the woman had first-type diabetes. She needed insulin. She was unwell. I checked her sugar level, and it was through the roof. Her stats were 4 times higher from the norm. She was surprised because she had medicine, and she did her necessary injections. It did not work because it should be kept in the fridge. With temperature should not be higher than +4. The weather back then was +32, and no electricity. Of course, that insulin was useless. Surely we had brought the pens with medicine for other conditions and showed her how to use it. There were people who could not report if they needed medical help because Russians likely took their cars. They live far in some village in the middle of nowhere, no transport or patrol, and those people had no chance to get aid and assistance. They could hope for volunteers or nobody, and they just died. People with chronic conditions had issues with access to the medicine and doctors. As for cancer, I had situation when I was examining the people, and I identified cancer. First to diagnose. Most of them, it was the cancer of thyroid, because we had Chernobyl. Because it is 30 years after the tragedy. Now we have a lot of similar cases. The breast cancer is on the second place, which I can identify during checkups. I have portable ultrasound machine, and visually it is possible to see as well. At least I can suspect cancer. As soon as I could see that, I strongly recommended to go to the nearest oncologist. On my recommendations to one of the women, she replied that hospital in Kherson was shelled every day, and the risk to be killed is very high as soon as I get there. While with cancer she had a year or two. She refused to see oncologist. It was her choice and her life. I had to warn her as a doctor. So, people just scared to go to the hospital in Chernihiv, Zaporizhzhia. It is relevant to all the places close to the front line. However, Children's Hospital Okhmatet is far from the front line, but it did not help. So, Russians do not care and target the hospitals.
you mentioned that your first experience with the occupied territories was the Kiev region. And I remember when Bucha, Irpin were liberated, and as a journalist, they were circulating among journalists, and it was circulating sort of such information which I was never be able to verify and confirm it. That after Russian army retreated, there were left dozens and dozens of raped children and women, and it was I think it was 3 or 4 buses were full of them, and they were first sent to the west of Ukraine and then to Poland for recovery, rehabilitation, and all of that. And when I started actually trying to find the experts, the confirmation, is it true? Can we talk? Can we bring it up for the British audience? But I was never able to do it. First, I was told like these people can't be touched at the moment, we just leave them. But eventually, it's never come out. Was it just speculation, or was that really true? Have you heard anything about it?
На жаль, я чесно хочу сказати, що
Well,
це
I
все,
am not
я
prosecutor
не
and
є прокурором,
investigator,
не
but
слідчим.
most
Коли
likely it
скажу
was
за
a
це є
provocation. It is
провокація
not true.
інформаційна, тобто це неправда. Правда про те,
The
що дуже
truth is, there
багато
were many
затримано,
cases among the
правда
women.
те, що багато з
Many
них
of them officially did not report it.
зверталися. І це мій найбільший біль, тому що
It is
дуже
my
багато
biggest
з них
pain.
не хочуть,
Many women
щоб
don't want
це
anybody to
знали,
find out,
особливо жінки
especially
в
in small
маленьких
villages
селищах,
and
щоб
towns,
сказати про те, що
because they want to
нам тут
stay
далі
and live
жити, нам
there
тут дітей
and don't
народжувати,
want to
ми
be
не хочемо,
judged.
щоб хтось про нас це
They
знав.
plan to
І
have
як
kids
лікар,
and
вони
families.
тихенько можуть щось
They
сказати,
don't want these
написати,
events to
сказати
define
хоча
them, and people
не
would
на
gossip.
там на
They
загал.
open up to me
Для
as a
того, щоб
doctor
це
and
була
ask
якась
for some
офіційна
advice,
історія, для цього
but
треба
not for the
звертатися
general
до
public.
кримінального слідства,
To
звертатися
make
до
this
поліції,
official, they would have
повідомляти
to
про
contact
факти
police
злочину,
and
поліцію,
inform about the rape,
проходити певні
go through the
процеси, це
verification.
також додатково, по суті, ретравматизація таких жінок. І
It is
вони не хочуть
re-traumatization of these women,
насправді
and they don't
поліції
want to go
багато
through it
справ по
again.
злочинам, багато.
Police has a lot of rape cases.
Вчасно, коли
During
вчасно
the time when I
працювала
was working
поліція,
with police,
то нам
we were
давали
given the contact
координати,
details,
були
especially in
контактні
Kharkiv region
механічні відділ,
and towns
пересилля,
like Izium
що
and
заїжджайте, будь
Balaklia.
ласка, за такою адресою, там
Usually, we would have asked to visit and talk to her if she needed anything, and if she wanted to report it because there was information that she was violated.
потерпала від насилля, можливо,
There
треба
was
якась
option
передумова,
to go
чи
for
хоче вона
rehabilitation and
адвокат,
officially to
поїхати
report
на
it.
реабілітацію, поїхати ще кудись і офіційно про це заявити.
The
Звісно,
majority of women
відмовлялися
refused to make
офіційно заявляти,
application,
і це
and it
якраз
was a problem.
трапилося. Про оці там 4 автобуса я сильно
As for these 4 buses, I have big doubts that it was organized during the first month after the liberation.
Я
I
думаю, що
think
він
there was more violated women than 4
автобусів,
buses would accommodate.
але це не було
But it
так
was not
організовано.
anything prepared to gather them all together and take for
На
rehabilitation.
жаль, це неправда.
How about men? Just now starting the one sort of rare interview of men who were violated in the occupied territories, or those who were in captivity in Russia. So I can see the dynamic. Men, step by step, are starting talking about it, because it is, you just mentioned, it is difficult to speak up for women, but it's expected. If there's sexual violence, it's supposed to be women. But men, they can't escape this fate as well under Russian occupation. Have you come across men, and how do they feel and how they deal with it?
Ну, я як лікар мала справу з чоловіками багато, але
As a doctor, I dealt with men a lot, but mainly it was psychosomatic illnesses. I am a woman. It makes difficult for them to open up. Especially, I am gynecologist. Of course, I did not write it on my t-shirt, but still, mainly they complained about physical violence to me at least. It was physical for them. For instance, it was in the village Yahidna. Now it is sadly known for everyone. It is the village where all the citizens gathered in the school basement. Because there was located Russian mortar brigade, their aim was Chernihiv. They wanted to take the city. Russians didn't want to deal with locals, that's why all were in one place. For you to understand, there were 40 people in 4 square meters. Some died during this captivity. Those who could not walk were shot dead, or they were tortured. Our team came there in 2 weeks after liberation. We were asked to visit the house. There was a man with officially diagnosed cancer. He knew it, and he was very weak. Cancer had spread. I gave him my recommendations for further treatment. His lungs were bad as well. He took my hand and started crying. I thought he was in pain, or got worse, but he was crying because he was ashamed, because Russians beat him up to go to the school, but he could not get up. He was too weak. So they made him stand on his knees, put the plastic bag on his head, and made him to sing the Russian anthem. He didn't know the words, so he sang the Soviet one. Only then they left him to live and let him stay in the house. His wife and son were taken to that basement. He was alone with anybody's help almost a month. Of course, it was a serious trauma. We visited him twice. Then he died in summer because of cancer. There were stories of humiliation. Yes, it wasn't sexual violence, but a man was humiliated. And he cried to me about this so-called experience.
Meeting all these people, what's the most difficult for you personally? You're a doctor, you're professional, but it's still your country and it's still your people.
The most difficult for me to understand how human can come and do those things. I can't understand it. I don't get it. I understand the power of Russian propaganda. Just think about the boy who graduated from school in Voronezh. Listen to music, watch the films about the war, films about the victory, films about Auschwitz, and read about it. This boy invaded to the foreign country without any previous aggression from this country and started killing babushkas and rape children. That's what I can't understand. I don't understand where's this button to switch, to turn human into this creature. I don't understand how human can do it. I don't think I will ever understand it. I understand the technologies they use, but influence on such vast population, how? I can't comprehend it. The most difficult. From my whole doctor's experience when I come to the village, somewhere between Kharkiv and Donetsk region, it's very beautiful there. Hills and fascinating landscape, mesmerizing gardens, and no people around. Our car is full of medicines and equipment, ultrasound. You are fully prepared to give any medical help, but there is nobody. People have gone, and all the houses are destroyed. There, about 30 mines in each household. Everything we have brought there for people stayed with us. It depends. It was very interesting with Kherson region. I fell in love with this region. I had never thought someone can be in love with the area. First thing happens, as soon as we arrived there, they say, "Ours here." When they say, "Our came," not saying that Ukrainians came, but our people came. It made my heart melting. There was one woman in Kherson who told me during our consultation there were 2 units in their village. One was the Russian Guard, and the second was from so-called Donetsk People's Republic. There was a difference between them. Russian Guards behaved like they were the elite. The houses where they stayed were more or less cleanish. At least there was some efforts to do so. However, with those who were from DNR, they turned houses into landfills. She wanted to kick them out and clean everything with bleach. There was another woman. She had lots of medical issues, and I gave her extensive recommendations and prescriptions. Then unexpectedly she told me she felt that she was sinful. When I asked why she thought so, the woman explained in their village Antonivka. It is near the Antonov Bridge across the Dnieper River. There were Russian soldiers, and they had mobile crematorium. They needed it as it was impossible to transport dead bodies from there to Kazan or elsewhere in far Russia. It's too expensive, and nobody is going to do it. They burned own soldiers. Every day the women from that village were watching if there was a smoke from that crematorium. If it was there, they felt good. They liked it. Those women needed to know the enemy had losses. That woman felt she was sinful, but she was not ashamed of it. I felt the same. It is a small illustration how people deal with occupation and how they cope with such challenging situations. Of course, they did not manifest their love and patriotism to Ukraine at that time. We felt their joy upon our arrival, and that Ukraine regained the control over that territory. Of course, there are lots of problems within the country with roads, medical help, access to the doctors, but they are at home. Nobody comes to them to humiliate for being Ukrainian pigs and kick them out of the house to live in the basements or without roof above their heads. It is not something tangible, and it's difficult to express with words. But the feeling is very strong. We could see those Kherson babushkas in clean, pretty scarves and with tidy, exemplary gardens. She could have lost her house because the mine landed there. But the babushka is adamant to give the cucumbers from her garden patch because I was too thin and needed to be fed, according to her. This warmth in these details which makes it quintessentially Ukrainian. It's impossible to conquer and break. Of course there are collaborators, separatists and traitors. The majority of people have this unbreakable Ukrainian spirit. That's why Russians try to take over the minds of our young people, and not the people who are strong life values.
How do you imagine victory? I mean, personally, emotionally for you, how do you think it's going to be?
Many of us lost a lot in this war. The victory won't be joyful. I think we will be happy to realize we can start to rebuild the country. Our sleep won't be disrupted because of the massive attacks during the night. We won't need to hide with kids in the basements. all things will not distract us from our lives. So, we will have resources and energy for post-traumatic growth. It's trendy expression which I love personally. We will be strong enough to evolve after all that trauma and become better than we were before. Also, I have a personal approach as well. There is a dream and there is an aim. My aim is something realistic and doable, making some steps for it. I want to organize my women's club in Donetsk, Luhansk, and Simferopol, and do it in Ukraine. I want to go there very much. I want to tell our women there about pregnancy, birth, their health, period, sex, and libido. I want to do all of this for them in Ukrainian. That is my aim. And I am trying to accomplish it, believing in Ukraine's armed forces, hoping we will win. A dream for me is something abstract. It's feeling something I would like to feel. I don't know what I'm going to feel, but I would like to experience it. I want to walk in Moscow wearing Ukrainian military uniform, especially on Chamberlain Lane. I am not going to do anything or humiliate anybody because we are the winners. No. I want to be there in the military uniform, with Ukrainian flag on the chevrons walking on the Chamberlain Lane. I love that street very much. I visited Moscow a lot in the past. This street has the atmosphere of the old Moscow. There are the top theaters. It has the attributes of the Russian culture. I want to walk there very much after everything we went through. I dream about it.
Wow, very exotic dream. I haven't heard of anything like that. Thank you very much. God bless you to have all the strength, inspiration, energy, and everything you do. Because the energy you bring to our people is priceless. I think when you visit them, they have a special place in their hearts for you.
Дякую. Щасливо.
Thank you for watching. Natalia Leliukh was my guest today. I know it's not probably a most popular topic. If I was talking to a serviceman about weapon and battlefield and analysis of war, you probably would be interested, minding the 96% of my audience is male and they're interested in war. But look at this as another tool of Russia's war against Ukrainian people, against civilians, against those people who still live trying to survive in their occupied territories. Don't know what to expect in the comments, but please do share your thoughts, your ideas, and I'll be very grateful. Thank you for all your likes, for shares, for subscription. It helps a lot to promote and develop my YouTube podcast. Thank you for watching.